The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host, assisted today ably by my canine companion, Toto, the great champion of the good. That's what one of the angels called him one time when we were doing a crossing. And today I have on as a recurring guest my friend Michael Quinn, who has been a prayer partner for a number of years now. I think we must go back 4 or 5. I'm really not sure. But today we're in the second part of a trilogy of a story that Michael and his wife Linda assisted with some years ago. This one involved Nadi, a man who was in Iraq and was killed in the crossfire of violence there between one kind of Muslim and another. In fact, when we met him, he was at prayer in a room that was not properly a mosque. The mosque had been bombed because of the strife in that country, and there was not a proper imam. That's kind of analogous to what a Christian would call a pastor. They didn't have a proper imam, and so he, as a businessman and an elder in the community, was part of figuring out where could we pray now that our mosque is bombed. They looked for a place that was windowless and sturdy, and made that their temporary meeting place. It's just that the men and the women don't pray in the same room in the Muslim tradition, and so the women were not in that room. They were in an adjacent place across the plaza or a street or something nearby, but not in the same room. And Nadi and the men with whom he was praying suddenly heard machine gun fire and screams. They were concerned for their wives and daughters. They had to figure out, what do we do? Do we dare open the door to this violence? But don't we have to protect our wives and daughters? So he chose to do that. He stepped out into the street, saw people that were wounded and bleeding. Some were still trying to run for cover, but they weren't even sure from which direction the danger was coming. Then he turned, I think, to his right and saw about a 10-year-old girl with men standing over her with guns pointed at her head, telling her that she must shoot and kill him, or they would kill her and her sister and her mother. So the little girl did shoot and kill him. That's how he died. He came to us in the same way that all the other ones come. He came in the night and showed me that. Not long after, we arranged a time to be together. That was Michael and Linda and me, and his story unfolded. It's in book 2 if you want to read the whole thing in greater detail. But today we told the story in about a 20-minute podcast that aired last week. Today we're going into the second part, which we call compassionate response. Compassion means to suffer with. So the way that we approach this is, for those who have heard this story, what did it evoke in you that made you feel more compassionate for this man? So that's kind of our focus today. So Michael has a little crackle going on in his audio, so I've asked him to stay muted until he speaks, and then mute again as soon as he's finished speaking. I keep doing that throughout the show, so we're going to make this work.
Well, we've known each other since September of 2019, where we were both on a panel at the annual conference of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. You were talking about the first book that you wrote, Afterlife Interrupted, and I was talking about a book that my wife and I co-authored, for hospice patients and their families. And after our particular session was done, I guess you felt like guided or inspired to ask me to be a prayer partner. I had already read your book, so I knew that you were legit. And that normally that's not something that I would be attracted to. But that's been 5 years now, and it's been one of the greatest blessings of my life. And
Thank you.
I thank you dearly for being included in your life.
Thanks. So that brings people up to kind of how we got to know one another. And then wasn't long after that that the pandemic hit the world. And previous to the pandemic, all of the sessions of helping somebody do what we call a crossing were done person to person, in person. Um, but during the pandemic, when it was so nearly impossible to be together, we learned that doing this on Zoom worked just fine. And I think we did this on Zoom, did we not?
That's right.
Yeah. So um, I related the story a little bit. Do you have a detail that you would want to add that you think fleshes the story out better than I presented it so far?
Well, it's an interesting, certainly one of the more interesting sessions that I was ever involved in. But on one hand, you look at it as being very horrific. On the other hand, because of it was so horrific, the response that Nadi had was was a lesson for us all to try and incorporate and assimilate into our heart. How can you, how could, if we put ourselves in his shoes initially, how could we forgive anybody that so horrifically machine gun our loved ones and then yourself? And so it was certainly a challenge for him, but that's the message that came through is how he addressed that challenge and realizing that it's so important that particularly now that we don't think of ourselves as separate from everybody else, that we have our beliefs and our beliefs are the true beliefs and somebody else believes something else, and then we take pot shots at it, and then we get into the political situations where we are now, where it's just very, very difficult to even consider somebody else's point of view. We don't see things as they are, but we see things as we are, that are a reflection of our heart. And if our heart is struggling, to love ourselves as well as others, then we're in a real challenge here. And I think it's apropos that you're doing this particular insight into Nadi at this particular time in history, because there are lessons which absolutely have to be learned.
I don't know how old he was, but I thought he must be in his late 40s or early 50s. He's old enough to have a family, and I had the impression that he had a family that at least included somebody as old as the young girl who killed him. They weren't babies. Maybe they were. We didn't go into a lot of that. We didn't know him before his death. We only got to know him through the dream and then the conversation that followed where we helped him cross. And then a follow-up conversation to ask his permission to use his story publicly. So we didn't know him in any other circumstance except what's presented in the book. But the way he spoke about his life and his country had been at war for most of his life. I don't know that he ever had an extended period of peace and plenty, but he was trying to run a business and be a member of a prayer community, a leader, and doing all that in the midst of war happening right around him. But I never heard a curse word or anything that suggested hatred, bitterness. He just seemed to me pragmatic. He just kept trying to do the next thing that was right in front of him that could promote the common good, that could help someone. He didn't go on and give us an angry diatribe about the enemies that destroyed his place of worship. He just accepted that as a past current event that created a need for specific decisions that leaders could make, even in the absence of ordinary channels of leadership. He just did the next thing. And when I've been pondering, I've prayed with him a lot. And I admire that trait in him, that regardless, if your whole world comes tumbling down around you, there's still something next to you. there's still there's still something next to be done. And if you choose the path of love, and if you don't feel like you need to generate the love by the power vested in you as Michael Quinn, if you do that, you'll run out in a hurry. But if you know that you're connected to the source who is love, God who is love, it doesn't run out. And there's always the next opportunity to do something loving for somebody else. And I think that's just what he did. He just got busy with his skills as a businessman. Maybe he knew realtors that could help him with this decision. Where can we find a place that would be safe to pray? So I really admired that about him.
I could respond to your question if I can, by reading a line from that particular story in book number 2, and maybe actually you can comment on it because I think it's so important. And that is emptying oneself, dying to the vainglory of our own little story with our own preferred opinions and grievances is essential to a life well lived. Otherwise, we stay in the illusion of our separateness. We then can only point at the other over there who is unlike our kind. That seems to sum up, the essence of where many of us are now. And so I'm asking you maybe provide some insight as to how you empty ourselves in order to transcend that idea that we are so separate and therefore engage in judgment.
Thank you for asking. Um, well, I think that the kind of that sort of self that thinks that it is separate from everything, a little cell in the universe or your own little planet, some little something, some little thing that's separate from every other little thing, is a place that I don't let myself stay, because that means that I think that I essentially am apart from everything and not a part of everything. That's the way I do it in my own imagination. It's easy to move that direction before you even know you're doing it. Um, whenever I love sports, and I can get really engaged when my team is in a back and forth battle with an opponent, because the construct of a sporting event is us and them. It's my side against your side, and it's winner take all. And inside of that little thing, I can get angry at the other team or its manager or its best player or its fans. I want them to sit down and shut up when they're cheering when my team is losing and so on. But I know that I'm doing that within a little self-contained space. Uh, it's not that there isn't some truth to the idea that I am me and not you, but it's not the big truth. There's a separate self, and I am me and not you, but I don't let myself stay in that mentality because I don't think that's the deepest truth. I might have a somewhat separated self, but sometimes it just needs to be poured out. Didn't he use language of pouring out? St. Paul talked about being poured out like a libation, like an offering, uh, and that he needed to be poured out so that the Lord could fill him. And I've preached on that regularly over my career, that sometimes we're so full of ourselves and our preferred opinion. And then one way to bolster your little preferred opinion is to find other people who are like you. It's not just me, it's all of us. We all think. And then you can you can make your little private little opinion seem much more important because you found like-minded folk who agree with you and who hate the same enemies that you do. I just don't want that. I don't want to be full of that. I want to pour that out. But it's a practice, a prayer practice that I don't think you check that one off like on a box. I don't think you've been meditating for decades now. Would you think that you're finished with that, Michael?
That's always a constant self-discovery, constantly, and a constant refresher. A constant emptying the bucket and have it filled again.
Yes. And then if you don't pour yourself out, and you stay in that sense of separate self apart from, you just make yourself lonely. That's going to be a consequence of it. If you keep insisting that I'm separate from everyone else, you're just going to court loneliness. And I don't think we were created for that. I think we were created to love. Uh, uh, well, let me take it in a next direction. One of the compassionate responses that I have um, to Nadi is that we only met him after he died. And we only met him after he had gone through an afterlife process of being helped by angels and saints and human folk or whatever, the cloud, the holy ones. He had been through a process, and as is true in our work consistently, we're at the tail end of that. There's been a lot of healing and growing towards truth. Part of growing towards truth is leaving behind falsehood or leaving behind partial truths. You know how when someone is sworn in our justice system, Michael, will you tell the whole truth? How is it? The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Uh, our separate self can want to hold back and tell only part of a story and call it my truth. And my truth is the big truth. And sometimes we just lie to ourselves that way, or we're lied to that way. He was told by his religious group that it was okay to think of the other kind of Muslim as the enemy, the infidel. And he was told in the afterlife, much of what your religious body taught you is true, but not all of it. And sometimes it didn't go far enough. It limited loving, for example. You must love and serve except over here. And he received that afterlife teaching and heard the truth of it and was willing to accept uh, a new truth, which meant making room for it, which sometimes means getting rid of some prior certitude. The Catholic tradition, we just finished Lent not long ago. That's part of what we're really trying to give up, not chocolate or alcohol or uh, anything else. We're trying to give up what's unworthy of us to make room for a deeper truth. And it seemed to me that he made room for a truth that, yeah, it's good to love one's own, but uh, but does one have to stop with one's clan or the right kind of Muslim?
I think like just looking at you and Toto, two very different beings, but you're bound together so beautifully. That sense of love that flows back between two of you. I think this whole podcast you can just mute all the sound and allow everybody just to look at you two. And I think you two and that love that is flowing back between you two says everything. Pictured worth a thousand words. And it's I'm so thankful that the Toto is a part of this.
Well, earlier it looked like he was putting his head down to go to sleep, and sometimes my sister calls him a puddle of poodle because sometimes he'll rest in your arms and he'll go limp. He's like 7.5 pounds of a puddle of poodle. We're talking about you, bud. Well, um, Nadi ended up talking about even his religious tradition forbade depictions of saints or images of God. He said he was so surprised that in this process he was brought to what do you call it? The order. I think he said a Christian, a priest, and an American. Uh, but he said that's part of what they're getting me to see is that these distinctions that I thought were other uh, m- must they're an illusion. Then he gave an example of the huge tsunami in the Indian Ocean that took away uh, 250,000 souls. Um, we had Ronnie. We helped a 12-year-old who died in that event. Um, and he was saying when there's a huge loss of life, some calamity that one hears about in the news, you hear about uh, all the people who died, and then the commentator might say, And because it happened in Indonesia, the largest population of Muslims in the world, most of them were Muslim. And he said, I think you Americans, when a plane goes down somewhere in the world and most of the people on it were from other countries, they'll say at the end, and among the dead were two Americans. Like, the kind that's your kind it needs to be separated out because they're so much more important somehow, or that somehow they touch the heart more because they're your kind. And he's saying, what I'm being taught here is that everyone is my kind. So I've loved that about him since the moment he said that.
I thought it was interesting too, I'm sure the people listening to the podcast know that at the end of the story, typically someone comes forth to help the soul move to the next level of the afterlife. In this particular case, uh, there was a float or a barge that appeared, and on that barge were loved ones of his and others who had died in a similar way that he had. And they were very happy, and they were very encouraging him to get on the barge. But he made it a point of saying that not everybody was ready to get on the barge. They were still holding on to certain aspects of their life that they didn't want to give up. And that he said that's okay too, because we all have free will. And I think the inference is that, okay, you may miss this barge, but maybe the next one that's coming, you'll be ready for it.
Yes.
So eventually we all get to that point of where Nadi is.
Do you remember him talking about uh, artwork inside of mosques, that it doesn't depict figures like in Christianity or especially Hinduism? But he said, we always had mosaics and they're colored patterns in the windows or in artwork of different kinds, paintings, uh, mosaic colors. And he said, here, they're not still, they're in motion. And then he mentioned a kaleidoscope, a child's toy. Did you ever have a kaleidoscope when you were a child, Michael? No? Well, I did. And I was an art student, or I always loved art. And you could, it's just a cylinder that might be about a foot long. And on the end of it is maybe about 3 or 4 inches of a second cylinder that twists. You can turn it with your hands. And there's mirrors inside that make these colored stones inside of it create these geometric patterns. And they're all beautiful. And the more you turn it, that they keep tumbling and changing. And he said, the angels here have showed me that they were really what's depicted in the windows. That we might have been taught that it would have been blasphemy to depict humans or angel forms with wings or other things. But he said, we're all beings of light. And that I'm a being of light. I was a being of light before I was killed. I'm still a being of light that looks a little different than I did before. But that we're all beings of light. And if we saw each other as beautiful beings of light at a deeper level, some of those other unflattering divisions would melt away. Do you remember that? Now, I think you were impressed with that, weren't you?
I took the words out of my mouth. I thought I was very impressed with that. And I was impressed from the perspective that okay, his faith said that you were not allowed to create graven images. It's an offense to Allah. But you've seen some of these beautiful mosques that it takes your breath away when you walk in to see just how beautiful it is. And that I think a lot of that beauty comes from the reality that those people who designed those mosques and did the stonework were somehow transcending whenever they did that work. They reflected, as Nadi says, in a sense, an angel energy that's reflected in those tile that we see, and at some level that affects us very profoundly, and that affected me profoundly. I came away with a whole new perspective on that aspect of their religion.
Well, of course, we transcribe our conversations, and so I've reread them recently, and so I have a transcription of you being awestruck at the beauty of that part of what he was saying. And you have a gift for that. I think maybe it's your meditative practice. I've only known you as a later in life man, but over the course of your life, you've been a meditator, and I think you probably have cultivated um, an aesthetic. You've cultivated a way of seeing the beauty around you that others might overlook. Would you think that's true?
Well, that's true. That a bit. My wife Linda was also a part of this session, and as you know, Linda, she did have that ability to go beyond the five senses and appreciate existence at a more fundamental level. So what I was saying, was a feeling that I had that comes to my heart. But when she says that, it's a reality that she experiences firsthand, and that's, that to me, it had a very big impression on me.
Well, you mentioned the when it came time to leave, he told us about the rivers that that he lived in what was sometimes called Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. And he said we hardly ever had any kind of festival of any kind all year long that didn't somehow have a connection to the rivers. And he told us when he was about to cross, he said, the space that we're in is filling up with water that's shallow and not frightening. You're not going to drown in it, and it's not so swift moving that it would sweep you away. It's just a gentle flow of water that you can wade in, but there's enough of it to float a barge, afloat. And he said throughout the year, different seasonal feasts very often had to do with some sort of harvest, the spring fruit or the winter wheat or whatever. And he said our floats were often decorated with whatever the seasonal thing we were celebrating. And it was his father who came on a float and said, we're all going to see the persons that are most attractive to us, that want us to come with them. I'm seeing my father. And so he said, and so I must go now. But he said, everybody's going to see the thing that would most attract them to leave this place and go on to what's better. Remember that? So with that, there's something to be said for the deep, deep loves that come from within our families. If we were loved well by our parents, as he was by his father, by a spouse, as you were loved by Linda for all those years, there's no taking that away. I believe that the person who has loved us best is the face of God for us, is the person that opens the pathway for God to travel down. So I understand that, but I also I wanted to at least speak to the idea that you sometimes hear expressed as charity, which is another word for love, that charity begins at home. Well, over the course of my life, I'm now 69, very often when I've heard that phrase evoked, it's defensive and kind of with a snarl, that charity begins at home, and that I don't want to love anybody else. That part goes unspoken, but charity begins at home, period. And it sounds like charity begins and ends at home. Have you experienced that, or do you feel that that's a little unkind?
Now, as you know, I do hospice work, and sometimes I teach new classes of volunteers, and almost always women. And I say to them, it's almost like your compassion is built into your DNA, because you are always front and center for your family, for your spouse, for your kids, for the people at work, for the hospice patients you're visiting, and on and on and on. At the end of the day, there's nothing left for you. You're exhausted. And so my message to them has always been charity begins at home, yes, but but the seat of that home is yourself, is your heart. That needs to be nourished first. And it's the most unselfish thing that you can do. It's not selfish at all, because once you fill your heart by filling the cup, then you have so much more to give to others during the course of your day. And that's, it becomes spontaneous. And I really think that word is important, because we struggle all the time and use our intellect when in saying, is this right or is that wrong? And we go back, we have this monkey brain that goes back and forth all the time. If we can reach a point where we're nourishing ourselves in a way every single day, spending time in silence, then that aspect of our heart, which is the essence of who we are, the light that we are, flows from us spontaneously without even considering it. And it's a cumulative process, but it's a beautiful process to experience. And that's my message. Whether you're in hospice work or anything in your life, is consider the nurturing of your own heart first.
Yes. Sometimes you hear it said about that admonition on airplanes about, if you have a child with you and the oxygen mask drop down, put your mask on first before you help the other one, which is wise. That's why they encourage that. When we were talking at the beginning of this podcast about the separate self and being poured out, I'm sure you're trying to help hospice volunteers think of their capacity to love, and they're going to pour out their love in the course of assisting the person that they're with. But it's also important to know that the bucket's always being filled. And there's not a hole at the bottom. It's not going to run out. You didn't have to say to Linda, listen up, Linda, I'm only going to say this one more time. I love you. Got it? You kept loving her until the end, and you still love her, and you'll love her again when you're together the next way you'll be together. But I wanted to kind of close or move toward the closure here with the idea of unity, which is oneness, uni. I'm an American. I'm a citizen of the United States of America, and we know that it takes effort for 50 different states to be united, to be one. That doesn't happen automatically. It's a choice, and it needs to be repeated again and again and again. To be united is, I think, it's built into being an American, that if we're going to maintain ourselves as a country, we need to strive towards oneness, because it's not automatic. Catholic, which I'm a Catholic, it also means universal. But I don't believe that being a Roman Catholic, which is 1.4 billion out of 8 billion, I don't believe that I'm to hunker down with my kind and be only a Roman Catholic and then try to turn everybody else in the world into a Roman Catholic or think less of them if they don't become one. I'm to love everybody all the time, and then to, within my family, my extended family, my local community in Tucson, my extended brotherhood, my citizenship, all of those areas are opportunities to love, but they don't have to start from a center as though they get more and more remote and away from the center. Think like when we used to listen to a lot of radio when we were in the car, and you might have a station tuned into the thing you really want to hear. For me, it would have been Houston Astros baseball, and I'm trying to hear, but we're getting further and further away from the station that's emitting that signal until it's so distant and still that you can hardly even hear it anymore. And then some other message starts blaring country music or something else that you didn't want to hear. I want to read a bit. I love all of my listeners and viewers. I really do. And I don't want to upset any of you, but I'm going to venture into something that's crossed my desk. We've just been through the death of Pope Francis in the last week and a half. Extraordinary event that happened on the last day of his life. He'd been so sick, and it looked like he was dying any number of times. And then he rallied sufficiently that on the last day of his life, he could entertain appointments, and he could ask to be sent around St. Peter's Square, what turned out to be one last time, to be with the people. But one of the things that occurred on that last day of his life was a visit with our own vice president, who became a Catholic 6 years ago. I'm quoting now from Crux, which is an online news source about Catholic stuff. This is written by Charles Collins, the managing editor of Crux, and it was dated today, which is May the 4th of 2025. I'm quoting him directly. A few months ago, Vice President Vance told Fox News is the idea of the Christian teaching on the order of love, and this is a quote from the Vice President. There's this old school, and I think it's a very Christian concept, by the way, that you love your family and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, then you love your fellow citizens in your own country, and then after that you can focus and prioritize the rest of the world. Soon after, Pope Francis wrote a letter to the Bishop of the U.S. refuting Vice President Vance, even if the letter wasn't addressed to him personally. This is quoting Pope Francis. Christian love is not a concentric expansion of interests that little by little extend to other persons and groups. The true order of love that must be promoted is that which we discover by meditating constantly on the parable of the Good Samaritan. This is me, if you remember, the parable of the Good Samaritan was prompted by a student of the law who said, "And who is my neighbor?" When Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." And who is my neighbor? That's when Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan. By meditating on the love that builds a fraternity open to everyone without exception. I understand the idea of thinking of oneself as located in a spot surrounded by spouses or children or extended family, a little bit further out your cousins, maybe the next door neighbors or the people in your town, or a next circle that's a little further out than that, the people in your state. Coming from Texas, there was this huge thing about being Texan. We were better than the other 49. We were reminded of it all the time. Love moving out from a center. But for me, that love has to be the kind of love that doesn't diminish or make someone else wait their turn to be loved. It's not like a to-do list where you put the most important things to the top, and if you happen to get around to it, you love the person at the bottom. I don't believe that's the Jesus way. If you understand that the whole universe is love, everybody in it is equally loved by the Creator, even if you might have specific loves that there's a certain rationality that rank ordering them about taking care of your wife and kids and so on. But loving everybody all the time, I think, is really the way of Jesus. So I wanted to throw that in here, and I hope it doesn't offend. It's so hard to talk about anything geopolitical anymore without feeling, that we're attacking someone else, because I'm honestly not doing that. But I wanted to throw that in here because of late, I get a lot of question and comment through my website after people look at these videos. And a number of them right now are people very nervous about world events and unstable, feeling like the world is unstable. And I was talking with a woman yesterday. I said, yeah, Cliff, it depends on what you're standing on. If you're standing on a rickety stepladder, or, it's going to feel unstable. It depends what you're standing on. And if you're standing on the eternal love of God that moves through time and space, that watches things come and go, that is loving everybody all the time, to me, that's the way I do it. It just makes it a little easier not to feel nervous. And then I remember that you're a little bit older than I am, but I don't know if you had to do anything about being bombed at school. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, I had to bring Spam and a gallon of water and a Clorox bottle to school, and just in case the missile fell on us. So, the world was unstable then too, and I just believe that in Nadi's life, it got absolutely unstable to the point that he had to make a decision whether to open a door or not and face a machine gun. How unstable is that? But he just kept doing the next thing that love required. And then afterwards, he learned that his love was extraordinary, but it got even bigger as he explored the first parts of his afterlife. All right, Michael, I just took over those last few minutes and rattled on. I'd like you to, you're my guest today. Would you help us out with the work?
Well, there are two things. Number one, when we were in grade school and we had to duck under our desk and whatever, and I was actually looking forward to that because Mary Ann was in the desk next to mine, and we both got under her together. And I love Mary Ann. So my second point I can attach it to your comment about Pope Francis and the vice president. At the same time, there is on this date, on this week, there's a lot of controversy over the president and using his social media account to show an image of himself as the Pope, and a lot of people are understandably very upset. There's a council of bishops in the state of New York that came out with a written condemnation of what had occurred. But I, one thing that Nadi said, which is absolutely true, is that we're all in this together. But what does that mean if we're all in this together? That means there's a connection we all had to each other, and therefore those things that occur to us that seem separate maybe just be an illusion. The things that happen, for example, the president and the image or whatever, was in a way almost a gift from creator or the infinite or whatever to trigger us possibly in a way that anger attracts anger, and there's a lot of anger surrounding that. And so maybe that in a way we could look at as yes, it's very unfortunate, it's disrespectful, it's certainly not funny, but rather than getting increasingly upset and contributing to a collective feeling of being angry and upset, that we look at that as an opportunity. Yes, we have our own opinions, and we understand that that could be very upsetting. But on the other hand, is there a lesson in that for us that 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 needs to be learned? And that's sort of how I look at it, as how we take a perspective on that. And is it engendering anger, or is it maybe compassion for someone who does something so egregious, yet a certain compassion that nothing happened by accident, and there's a bigger reason for this, and that reason is what I try to let my heart make a decision rather than my mind. Does that help?
Sure. Well, I'm grateful that you were available to be on this podcast today, and it's a happy memory of you and Linda and I first meeting Nadi. If you remember, he came back later to help Omi, the child soldier, and he told us that he's become a student of our process. So he's become kind of a team member. So I haven't met him yet, but even you remember the Protestant pastor that was drowned? He said, I never spoke to a Muslim man, and now that I'm included in a group that includes one. My world is getting bigger all the time. Well, with that, I think I need to go, and my little doggy, I think, is getting a little restless. So I'm going to draw this episode to a close, and thank you, Michael Quinn, prayer partner and human being extraordinaire, for being a part of the show.
Thank you, Father, and thank you, Toto, and God bless you both.
All right, thank you. So, for those of you that have tuned in to this podcast, thank you for spending your time with us today. If there's something that I might be able to do for you, I can be contacted at nathan-castle.com, and then on the website there's a contact button. I ask that for those of you that are new to our process of these crossings, if you have questions about that, please don't inquire about it without first having read one of the books, because that can explain a lot of things. And then if we do have a conversation, it can be richer. So with that, I wish you all a blessing. Remember that I pray for you all the time, and especially I pray for wherever you're wounded, wherever you're hurting, wherever there might be unresolved stuff from long ago or recent, whatever. I pray for healing, and that we can be one, that we can all be one. So that's it for this time. Join us next time for the next episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. God bless you. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.